60 years have passed since the gates of Stalag 13 first opened on American television screens, and the people who stepped through them lived lives that nobody watching at home could have imagined. One of them was murdered in his sleep in an Arizona apartment, and his killer was never brought to justice. Another was a real survivor of Nazi concentration camps who played a prisoner of war in a comedy set inside a POW camp and carried his numbered tattoo into every episode he filmed. A third ran away to sea at 14, reinvented himself entirely, and went on to become the most kissed man in game show history. And two of the men who played their German captors were, in a twist that defies every instinct, Jewish refugees who had personally fled the very regime they portrayed on screen. In fact, 4 of the main German characters were played by Jewish actors, all of whom had served in the United States Armed Forces during the very war their characters were fighting on the wrong side of. These are not just television biographies, these are lives, and some of them ended in ways that still refuse to let go. He was the center of gravity around which the entire show revolved. Handsome, quick-witted, unflappable, Colonel Robert Hogan was the kind of American hero that the 1960s were still willing to believe in without irony. Bob Crane played that man across all 168 episodes of the series with a lightness and confidence that made the whole improbable premise feel completely natural. He was 37 years old when Hogan's Heroes premiered in September 1965. Robert Edward Crane was born on July 13, 1928 in Waterbury, Connecticut. Music came to him first. He began playing drums at the age of 11, inspired by watching the jazz legend Gene Krupa at a live performance. By the time he was in high school, he was playing in the school orchestra, the marching band, and the jazz band simultaneously. He was good enough to drum for the Connecticut Symphony Orchestra as a young man, until they dismissed him for not being, in their words, serious enough. That assessment proved somewhat ironic. The snare drum rhythm that opens the Hogan's Heroes theme tune was played by Crane himself. After a stint in the Connecticut National Guard, he found his way behind a radio microphone and made himself into one of the most popular disc jockeys on the West Coast, hosting the #1 morning show at CBS Radio's KNX in Los Angeles, known as the King of the Los Angeles Airwaves. He brought drums into the studio and played along with records on air. He interviewed every celebrity who came through town. The transition to television came naturally, and by 1965, he was cast in the role that would define his life. 2 Emmy nominations followed. CBS was delighted. What was happening behind that easy smile was a different story. Crane had developed an obsession with photography and videotape, and with documenting his own sexual encounters. He accumulated hundreds of recordings. He showed them to colleagues on set. The Disney studio, after learning what was circulating in his dressing room during the filming of a 1973 family picture, quietly blacklisted him. The major opportunities disappeared. By the late 1970s, the star of one of the most watched shows of the previous decade was touring the dinner theater circuit, starring in self-produced plays in cities far from Hollywood. In June 1978, he was in Scottsdale, Arizona, performing in a comedy called Beginner's Luck at the Windmill Dinner Theater. On the morning of June 29th, his co-star Victoria Berry arrived at his apartment and received no answer. She let herself in. The bedroom was covered in blood. Bob Crane lay dead in his bed, bludgeoned while he slept. He was 49 years old. There was no forced entry. There was no struggle. Someone he trusted had walked through that door. Suspicion centered for years on John Henry Carpenter, a video equipment salesman and close companion who shared Crane's obsessions. An electrical cord from a video camera had been tied around Crane's neck after death. Blood matching Crane's rare type was found in Carpenter's rental car. When the case finally came to trial in 1994, the DNA evidence was inconclusive and Carpenter was acquitted. He died in 1998. The case remains officially unsolved. Nearly half a century later, no one has ever been charged with the murder of the man who played Colonel Hogan. The monocle, the riding crop, the blustering self-importance that collapsed at the first sign of actual authority. Colonel Klink was a comic masterpiece. A fool so perfectly realized that audiences loved him the way they love all great comic villains, with pure delight at his own irrelevance. Werner Klemperer gave him every ounce of that brilliance. He was 45 years old when Hogan's Heroes began, and the biography behind the man who played the Nazi commandant contains one of the most quietly astonishing ironies in the history of American television. Werner Klemperer was born on March 22, 1920, in Cologne, Germany, into one of the most distinguished musical families in Europe. His father was Otto Klemperer, the legendary conductor. The family was Jewish. Werner grew up surrounded by music, taking lessons in piano, trumpet, and violin, while his father led the Cologne Opera House and later the prestigious Kroll Opera in Berlin. Then, in 1933, as the Nazis consolidated power, the Kroll was shuttered. The family left for Los Angeles, where Otto became conductor of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Werner was 13. He served in the United States Army during World War II before beginning his acting career. Before Klink made him a household name, Klemperer had established himself as a serious dramatic actor. His first major film role came in Alfred Hitchcock's The Wrong Man in 1956. Then, in 1961, he appeared in Judgment at Nuremberg, playing Emil Hahn, an unrepentant Nazi prosecutor on trial for crimes against humanity, alongside Spencer Tracy, Burt Lancaster, and Marlene Dietrich. That same year, he also played the title role in the film Operation Eichmann, opposite his future Hogan's Heroes co-star, John Banner, two Jewish refugees from Vienna and Cologne, playing the Nazis who had driven them from their countries, 4 years before they put on German uniforms together every week for American comedy audiences. When the offer of Colonel Klink arrived, Klemperer accepted it on one absolute condition: that Klink would never succeed at anything. He was nominated for the Emmy 5 times across the show's 6-season run, in 1966, 1967, 1968, 1969, and 1970, and won twice in 1968 and 1969. His father, Otto, who watched an episode during the show's run, told his son simply, "Your work is good." Coming from Otto Klemperer, that was not a small statement. After the show ended, Klemperer returned to music. He sang baritone in opera productions. He received a Tony Award nomination for his role as a Jewish shopkeeper in a 1987 Broadway revival of Cabaret. He performed as narrator with nearly every major symphony orchestra in the United States. During a 1989 appearance on The Pat Sajak Show, Sajak presented him with a replacement monocle. His original prop from the set had been stolen from his home. Werner Klemperer died on December 6, 2000, of cancer at his home in Manhattan. He was 80 years old. His ashes were scattered at sea. The Jewish refugee from Cologne, who had watched the Nazis drive his family from their country, outlived Hogan's Heroes by nearly 3 decades and went out exactly as he had lived, with complete control over the terms of his own legacy. "I know nothing, nothing." That catchphrase, delivered with an expression of theatrical innocence so broad it bordered on performance art, made Sergeant Schultz one of the most immediately recognizable characters in the history of American television. John Banner gave him warmth, buffoonery, a kind of rueful humanity that made audiences root for the hapless German sergeant, even as they rooted against everything he ostensibly represented. He was 55 years old when the show began, and behind that performance lay a life story of such dark, wrenching irony that it takes a moment to fully absorb. Johann Banner was born on January 28, 1910, in Vienna, into a Jewish family in what was then the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He began pursuing a law degree before abandoning it entirely for the theater. Then came March 1938 and the Anschluss, Nazi Germany's annexation of Austria. Banner was in Switzerland on a theatrical tour when it happened. He could not go home. He emigrated to the United States as a political refugee, arriving with no English at all, learning his first lines phonetically until the language took hold. Many members of his family were not as fortunate. The Holocaust consumed them, while Banner rebuilt his life on the other side of the Atlantic. In 1961, he and Werner Klemperer co-starred in Operation Eichmann, 2 Jewish refugees playing Nazis on screen together 4 years before Hogan's Heroes would put them both back in German uniform and make the whole country laugh. When the role of Schultz arrived, Banner was 55 years old and had been living this particular irony for 2 decades. He brought something to Schultz that no other actor could have provided: the lived knowledge of exactly how much it costs to become the thing you are pretending to be. When critics accused Schultz of being a cuddly Nazi, Banner defended the character directly. "Schultz is not a Nazi," he told TV Guide. "I see Schultz as the representative of some kind of goodness in any generation." That answer meant something different coming from him than it would have from anyone else on that set. After the show ended in 1971, Banner retired with his wife to France, finally returning to the European continent from which he had been exiled. Less than 2 years later, while visiting Vienna, the city of his birth, he suffered an abdominal hemorrhage and died in a hospital there. The date was January 28, 1973, his 63rd birthday. The man who had been chased out of Austria by the Nazis died in Vienna on the very day he had been born there, 63 years before. Corporal Newkirk was the team's con artist, the Cockney pickpocket, card sharp, forger, and all-purpose improviser who could get in or out of anything with a wink and a smirk. Richard Dawson played him with effortless charm. He was 32 years old when Hogan's Heroes began, and that charm proved completely transferable to every other arena he entered afterward. Because Richard Dawson did not simply have an interesting post-Hogan's Heroes career, he had one of the most unexpected second acts in the history of American entertainment. He was born Colin Lionel M. on November 20th, 1932, in Gosport, Hampshire, England. His father drove a moving van. His mother worked in a munitions factory. He was evacuated during World War II as German bombing targeted England's port cities, and the disruption left him with only about 2 years of formal schooling. At 14, he ran away from home and joined the Merchant Marine. He briefly took up amateur boxing. His mother came to watch one of his bouts, and it turned out to be his last match. He retired on the spot. At 18, he discovered theater and found the stage suited him perfectly. In the late 1950s, he married Diana Dors, the English actress and screen siren frequently described as Britain's answer to Marilyn Monroe. The couple came to America together. He was considered for the lead role of Colonel Hogan before the producers decided his American accent wasn't convincing enough, a decision that redirected his career without diminishing it. As the Cockney Newkirk, no accent work was required. From Hogan's Heroes, he moved to Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, then to Match Game, where he appeared in 1,279 episodes over 5 years. Then came Family Feud in 1976. Survey says, became one of the most recognized phrases in American television. He hosted the program from 1976 to 1985. Saturday Night Live mocked him during that era, with Bill Murray portraying him as leering and nasty. In 1987, he turned the mockery inside out by playing Damon Killian, a vain, murderous game show host, opposite Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Running Man. Critics loved it. After divorcing Diana Dors, Dawson continued to send her flowers on her birthday every year until she died, and publicly defended her reputation throughout his life. In 1981, a woman named Gretchen Johnson appeared as a Family Feud contestant, and something clicked. They began a relationship that lasted the rest of his life, marrying in 1991. On June 2, 2012, Richard Dawson died in Los Angeles from complications of esophageal cancer. He was 79 years old. The runaway boy from Gosport who had learned his lines for Newkirk without ever having been formally taught to act, gave American television something it had never quite had before: warmth as a professional discipline. There was a number tattooed on his forearm, A5714. The Nazis put it there when Robert Clary was 16 years old. He wore it every day of his life, including every day he spent on the set of Hogan's Heroes, a comedy set inside a German prisoner of war camp, in which he played a feisty French corporal who outwitted the Wehrmacht with cheerful frequency. He was 39 years old when the show began. The distance between that tattooed number and the studio comedy is so vast that it exists almost beyond the reach of language. Robert Max Weiderman was born on March 1, 1926, in Paris, the youngest of 14 children of a tailor from Warsaw. He was 16 when the deportations began. In 1942, he and 13 members of his family were sent to the Nazi concentration camps. He was the only one of the 13 who were deported who came back. 3 other siblings had not been taken and survived in occupied France. He survived because he sang. At Buchenwald, he performed for SS soldiers every other Sunday alongside an inmate who played accordion, and he believed to the end of his life that his voice, his youth, and his ability to entertain had kept him alive when everything else was trying to kill him. He was liberated in 1945 at the age of 19, and his response was to turn that page as fast as humanly possible. He recorded a song in America called "Put Your Shoes on, Lucy" that became a genuine hit. He reinvented himself as Robert Clary, and he did not look back. For over 3 decades, he kept his silence entirely, performing in nightclubs, in musical theater, in Hogan's Heroes, in 3 different soap operas. He spent 15 years playing Robert LeClaire on Days of Our Lives. He married Natalie Cantor, the daughter of the comedian Eddie Cantor, and was devoted to her for 32 years until her death in 1997. He painted canvases from photographs he took on his travels and maintained a Parisian-style garden at his Beverly Hills home for decades. Then, in 1980, provoked by Holocaust deniers gaining public attention, something broke open. He began lecturing in schools, colleges, and synagogues across the country. In 1994, he was among the very first to record testimony for Steven Spielberg's Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, and then volunteered as an interviewer, personally recording the testimonies of 75 other survivors over 18 months. His autobiography, From the Holocaust to Hogan's Heroes, was published in 2001. Robert Clary died on November 16, 2022, at his home in Beverly Hills. He was 96 years old, the last surviving principal cast member of Hogan's Heroes. "Don't ever hate," he told students again and again. The youngest of 14 children had outlived them all and spent the final 4 decades of his long life making sure that what happened to his family would never be forgotten. In 1965, American network television was not a welcoming environment for black actors seeking serious, dignified roles. Ivan Dixon understood this and took the role of Sergeant Kinchlow anyway. He was 34 years old when the show began. For 5 seasons, he played the communications expert of Hogan's Underground, the man whose technical skill held the entire operation together. He played the role with intelligence and quiet authority. Then, before the final season, he left. The role had given him everything it was going to give him. Ivan Nathaniel Dixon III was born on April 6, 1931, in New York City, growing up in Harlem before finishing high school in North Carolina, then earning his degree at North Carolina Central University. His Broadway debut came in William Saroyan's The Cave Dwellers in 1957. The following year, he was in A Raisin in the Sun, a production where he met Sidney Poitier. The two became lifelong friends, and Dixon served as Poitier's stunt double in the 1958 film The Defiant Ones. He was cast in 2 episodes of The Twilight Zone, including The Big Tall Wish, a then rare instance of a primarily black cast in American television drama. He also appeared in the 1964 independent film Nothing But a Man, which won prizes at the Venice Film Festival and was hailed as a landmark of American independent cinema. Dixon himself said it was the performance he was most proud of, and yet it was Sergeant Kinchlow that most audiences remembered. After leaving the show, Dixon built an entirely second career as a television director. The Waltons, The Rockford Files, The Bionic Woman, Magnum P.I., and The A-Team among his credits. He also owned and operated radio stations in Hawaii. He was inducted into the Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame. He had escaped the prison camp entirely, in every sense of the phrase. Ivan Dixon died on March 16, 2008, in Charlotte, North Carolina, of kidney failure. He was 76 years old. His daughter pointed not to the television work, but to the stage roles of his early career, and to the long, quiet decades of directing, when nobody needed him to be famous anymore. He was the explosives expert who was slightly afraid of explosions, the true believer, the man whose enthusiasm exceeded his competence, whose cheerful earnestness served as a comic counterweight to Newkirk's cynical wizardry. Larry Hovis played Sergeant Carter with a specific kind of likable incompetence that is genuinely harder to pull off than it looks. He was 29 years old when Hogan's Heroes began. Larry Vaughn Hovis was born on February 20th, 1936 in Wapato, Washington, a small town within the boundaries of the Yakama Nation. Carter was written as part Sioux. Hovis himself had partial Yakama heritage, which gives that detail an unscripted layer of reality. He grew up in Houston, Texas, and his story begins in music. As a child, he sang with his sister at county fairs and on the radio. He joined a vocal quartet called The Mascots, and appeared on Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts. While studying philosophy at the University of Houston, a degree that nobody associates with the bumbling Carter, he signed with Capitol Records and released a solo album, My Heart Belongs to Only You, in 1959. He appeared in 2 Broadway revues in New York before relocating to California in 1963 to try television. He was discovered by Andy Griffith's personal manager and landed work on Gomer Pyle, USMC, and The Andy Griffith Show. He joined Hogan's Heroes after 2 other actors backed out of the series, replacing a character originally played by William Christopher, who left the show and went on to play Father Mulcahy in MASH. Hovis then wrote for and appeared on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In alongside Richard Dawson, receiving an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Writing Achievement. His writing credit was accidentally omitted from the published nomination. He was nominated, recognized, and then administratively erased, all in the same season. He also produced several game shows in the early 1980s, including an early version of Lingo and a television adaptation of Yahtzee. Then he became a teacher, spending 12 years developing the TV and film acting program at Texas State University in San Marcos, mentoring hundreds of students. In July 1978, when Bob Crane was murdered in Scottsdale, Hovis was one of the pallbearers at the funeral. In 2003, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. On September 9, 2003, Larry Hovis died at Hospice Austin's Christopher House in Austin, Texas. He was 67 years old. He came in at the end, the final season, 1970 to 1971, replacing Ivan Dixon as the communications specialist in Hogan's Underground. Kenneth Washington was 28 years old when Hogan's Heroes first aired, though he himself didn't join the cast until the show's 6th and final year, stepping into a role that audiences had spent 5 seasons watching someone else inhabit. He did the job with professionalism and without complaint. Kenneth Washington was born on October 19, 1936, in Ethel, Mississippi, and grew up in San Francisco. Before Hogan's Heroes, he had built a range of television credits, a recurring role as Officer Miller on Adam 12, and a guest appearance in the Star Trek episode That Which Survives in 1969, playing the engineer John B. Watkins, whose fate is sealed within minutes of his first appearance on screen. He was also notably the first black actor to be featured in a major guest role on Petticoat Junction, a distinction that speaks to both the rarity and the significance of such moments in late 1960s American television. He appeared in the 1973 science fiction film Westworld. After Hogan's Heroes, guest appearances continued through the 1970s and 1980s, his last credited role coming in 1989 on A Different World. Kenneth Washington died on July 18, 2025, at his home in Beverly Hills, California. He was 88 years old. At the time of his death, he was the last surviving principal cast member of Hogan's Heroes, the final season's quiet edition, outlasting everyone who had come before him, including Robert Clary, who had preceded him in death by nearly 3 years. The last man out of Stalag 13, he was the man above Klink, the bullying, blustering general who threatened his incompetent subordinate with reassignment to the Russian front in nearly every episode and never followed through, because sending Klink away would mean getting someone competent, which would ruin everything. Leon Askin played General Burkhalter across 67 of the show's 168 episodes with a magnificent, barely contained contempt that served as the show's second great comic engine. He was 57 years old when the show began. And, like Klemperer and Banner, he was a Viennese Jew who had fled for his life. He was born Leo Ashkenazi on September 18, 1907 in Vienna, making his first stage appearance as a child in front of Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I during World War I, when he was asked to recite a poem at a public ceremony. He trained as an actor, then moved to Germany to work, until 1933, when the Nazis removed him from his theater position in Dusseldorf simply because he was Jewish. In April of that year, he was arrested by the SA and beaten by members of the SS. The scar visible on General Burkhalter's face throughout Hogan's Heroes was not makeup. It was real, a permanent mark from that beating, worn on screen for 6 seasons in front of audiences who had no idea what it represented. He escaped to Paris, worked as a cabaret artist, fled again when France fell, and arrived in the United States in early 1940. He joined the United States Army, served in the Army Air Corps during World War II, changed his name to Askin, became an American citizen, and wrote The Orientation Digest, an information publication for soldiers being deployed overseas. Before Hogan's Heroes, he appeared in Billy Wilder's political comedy 1, 2, 3 opposite James Cagney in 1961. After the show, he continued acting in both American and European productions well into old age, returning eventually to Vienna. At 93, he was still giving interviews. "I'm a man who lived through difficult times. I'm a man who survived the monster of all times, Adolf Hitler. And I'm still, at my high old age, successful in my profession. That is the pride with which I live." Leon Askin died on June 3, 2005, in Vienna, Austria, the same city from which he had been driven nearly 7 decades earlier. He was 97 years old, buried at the Vienna Central Cemetery. The boy who once recited a poem before an emperor had outlasted nearly everyone, survived everything the century could throw at him, and ended up, appropriately, back where it all began. If the prisoners of Stalag 13 had a truly dangerous antagonist, someone who actually suspected Hogan, actually pressed for investigations, actually came close to the truth, it was not Klink and not Schultz. It was Major Hochstetter of the Gestapo. Played by Howard Kane with a barely suppressed fury and a gift for catchphrase that rivaled Schultz's own, Hochstetter appeared in 37 episodes across the show's entire run, bringing a genuine edge of menace to a show that otherwise kept its villains safely incompetent. He was 39 years old when the show began, and, completing a pattern that still astonishes, he was Jewish. Howard Kane was born Howard Elmer Cohen on January 2, 1926, in Nashville, Tennessee, making him the only principal cast member of the show's German contingent who was actually American-born. His family moved to New York City when he was 13, and he began studying acting immediately. He learned to erase his Southern accent so completely that he eventually became a master of 32 distinct foreign and American dialects, a range that placed him among the most technically skilled character actors of his generation. He served in the United States Navy during World War II, fighting in the Pacific Theater. Then he enrolled at Columbia University's School of Drama and graduated summa cum laude. His Broadway career was serious and sustained. Productions including Wonderful Town, Inherit the Wind, Tiger at the Gates. When Ray Walston left the original production of Damn Yankees, it was Howard Kane who stepped in to play Mr. Applegate, the devil himself. He appeared in Judgment at Nuremberg in 1961, alongside Werner Klemperer, 4 years before both men put on German uniforms for Hogan's Heroes. He acted in more than 750 live and film television programs across his career. Hochstetter became his signature, the one German officer who was neither buffoon nor coward, who looked Colonel Hogan in the eye and knew, even if he could never prove it, that something was wrong. His catchphrase, directed at Klink whenever Hogan appeared inexplicably in the commandant's office, was simply, "Who is this man?" And then, the fury building, "What is this man doing here?" 7 words, 2 questions. Delivered every time with the full weight of an institution that had the power to destroy people, and the frustration of a man who understood he was being made a fool of. There was another dimension to Howard Kane that almost nobody in the audience knew about. From the summer of 1970 until his death, the last 23 years of his life, he devoted his spare hours to the 5-string Appalachian banjo. He entered prominent banjo and fiddle contests across the South and won trophies at 29 of them for both Best Traditional Banjo and Traditional Singing. The Jewish actor from Nashville, the master of 32 dialects, the Columbia summa cum laude graduate who played the Gestapo on television, spent his evenings playing old-time mountain music and winning competitions nobody knew he was entering. Howard Kane died on December 28, 1993, in North Hollywood, California, at the age of 67, just 4 days before what would have been his 68th birthday. He was a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. He is buried at Eden Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. Major Hochstetter never did find out what was happening in that prison camp, but Howard Kane knew exactly who he was, and he lived that knowledge on every stage, in every dialect, and in every note of every tune he ever played. The show was always winter. Every single episode, regardless of when it was filmed, shows snow on the ground and frost on the windows of Stalag 13. This was a deliberate production decision made before a single frame was shot. By locking the setting into permanent winter, the producers could air the episodes in any order without continuity problems. The practical consequence was that the cast spent most of their filming time in the California summer heat, temperatures regularly above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, dressed in full woolen Wehrmacht and prisoner uniforms, acting cold. The snow in the early seasons was actually salt, piled strategically around the set. Later, it was white paint. The leather jacket worn by Bob Crane as Colonel Hogan throughout the series was not a prop made for the show. It was originally worn by Frank Sinatra in the 1965 World War II film Von Ryan's Express, shot the same year Hogan's Heroes premiered. Decades later, when Greg Kinnear played Bob Crane in the 2002 biographical film Autofocus, he wore the same jacket for the role. The famous tagline, "If you liked World War II, you'll love Hogan's Heroes," was not invented by the show's marketing team. It was proposed sarcastically by comedian Stan Freberg during a radio interview with Bob Crane in 1965. Freberg offered it as a joke, and Crane told him on air, "No, let's not say that." Shortly afterward, it became the show's actual tagline anyway. Larry Hovis refused to remove his wedding ring for the entire 6-year run of the show. Sergeant Carter was written as an unmarried man, but Hovis was devoted to his wife and would not take the ring off. The production team quietly solved the problem by having him wear gloves and otherwise keep his left hand out of shot for 168 episodes. Nobody watching at home ever noticed. In 1968, while the show was still in production, 4 of its cast members appeared together in a completely separate film, The Wicked Dreams of Paula Schultz, a comedy set in divided Berlin. Bob Crane, Werner Klemperer, Leon Askin, and John Banner all appeared in it. Klink, Schultz, Burkhalter, and Hogan cast as different characters, while continuing to film the series simultaneously. The film was not a success, and all 4 men went straight back to Stalag 13. Clary, Dawson, Dixon, and Hovis recorded an actual album together in 1968. Hogan's Heroes Sing the Best of World War II. It included lyrics written for the show's theme music. It exists. People bought it. The last principal cast member died in the summer of 2025. Now there are none. Stalag 13 is empty. But the show and the improbable, complicated, profound lives of the people who made it will not stop being worth remembering. Tell us in the comments, which of these stories surprised you most? And where in the world are you watching from today? If you want to keep finding the real stories behind the classic shows, subscribe to this channel and ring the bell. Every week, we go past the legend and into the life.